Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of ADDAZERO Business Podcast. This is episode 10. We're into double figures already. And as promised, I've already told you that we'll be bringing on board a whole series of other professionals and experts in their career and industry to be able to share their thoughts about how to be able to add a zero to you and your business, but not only to the turnover of the business, but to your personal disposable income. And I cannot tell you as to how much I've been excited to be able to bring this guy onto the show and been able to hang on until he's had some availability to be able to share some of his wisdom with us. So without further ado, I'd like to be able to introduce you to not only an author, trainer, coaching consultant, author of the book, Making Channel Sales Work, a sales guru with a motto that says, Pecunia Opus Dimidum Duplum. I think I've pronounced that correctly. However, this gentleman, having spent pretty much his whole life in sales, regularly helps clients see revenue growth in excess of 300% and profit growth in excess of 500%. With an ambition to be able to fill the Hammersmith Apollo as a stand-up comedian, please listen out for what offer is available to you today from Mr. Marcus Cauchi. It's lovely to have you with us, Marcus.
Thanks for having me today. I'm bound to disappoint after that build-up, but I have to fail. I'm used to it.
Now, Marcus, we've known each other for a number of years now, and I've been through your sales training. I'm a regular listener to your own podcast, The Inquisitor, in which you really hold no holes back with regards to being able to demonstrate as to why pretty much everybody else in the industry has simply got sales completely wrong, and offer a completely new and quite refreshing, even if not somewhat challenging at times, approach. Is that a fair assumption?
Well, I don't say everybody, but there is an awful lot of crap out there. There are a lot of people who are peddling stuff that was already out of date when Queen Victoria was a kid. They don't really understand why human beings buy. They don't. I mean, my pal Martin Lucas is a mathematical psychologist, and his essential byline is that human beings don't understand human beings. And unless you understand human beings, you're going to struggle in sales because most of it is psychology. And unless you understand the underlying principles behind technique, all it is technique. It's just a move, and that's negatively manipulative. And so I spend 90% of my working life. I mean, for the last 17 years, I've been a trainer and a coach. I'm now going into a new chapter of my life where I'm acting as a fractional chief revenue officer for a number of technology companies. So I'm going and putting this stuff into practice without having to sit on the sidelines and whimper in frustration and losing my hair because I'm seeing people completely fuck it up. And I'm just tired of sitting there watching people do a half-baked job. There's no reason for it. Selling actually is relatively simple, but so few people with sales on their job title are salespeople. At best, they're order takers. If they're really awful, they're what I demeaningly term negotiators. Now, there is a difference between professional negotiation and what most people deem negotiating, which is just giving stuff away in a one-sided manner and not getting anything of equal value back. And as a result of that, what they do is they give away margin, they give away profit, they take on additional work, they fall into free consultancy, they keep pursuing non-opportunities or opportunities with prospects that should never be customers because they don't take the time to plan, they don't build strong foundations, they don't reflect, they're not introspective, they don't see where the customer's journey begins and ends. Because most people see the customer journey. If you're going to McDonald's, from a McDonald's employee's perspective, the customer journey begins when their car drives up to the squawk box, places an order, pays their money, and picks up the order. But actually, the customer journey starts when one of your kids screams, "I'm hungry!" And then you pile into the car. and World War III is occurring in the back. They're punching and fighting each other. They're arguing. They're telling you what they want. Are we there yet? And you finally get to the queue. There are 5 cars in front of you. You're trying to take the order. They change their minds. You take the order, but you think you're going to get it wrong. You get up to the squawk box. The sound quality is bad. There's someone who doesn't speak great English. You have to tell it 2 or 3 times. One of the little buggers changes their mind, and you have to change the order. You have to listen to it again. Then eventually you get to the payment window. Now, all the way through, you're wondering, will they have my order correct? Now, if you've got a vegetarian, you know you're going to have to park up for 5 minutes. Now, when you get to the pickup window, you've got 5 hungry carloads behind you. So do you check it while you're there, or do you drive and play Russian roulette? So then you drive home. Now you've got milkshake going all over your upholstery, and you finally get home. They eat the food, and there's a bit of indigestion, maybe a little bit of vomit to clear up, and you've got to get rid of the packaging. Now that's the customer journey from the consumer's perspective. And very few salespeople think like that. What they think is when we touch them and when we stop touching them, and that's the length of it. But the reality is that organizations have a collective experience of their problems, their pain, their frustrations. And the analogy I like to use is if you imagine a night bombing raid, every time a bomb drops, there's a flash of light and a little thud. Well, each one of those is a center of dissatisfaction. And collectively, if you don't understand how all those threads fit together, then you're really going in trying to solve a point solution and provide a point solution to symptoms instead of solve the cause at its root. And so most of what I've done and most of what I'm going to be doing in the future is around helping people to see that bigger picture so that you can become your customer's partner, not trusted advisor, not a vendor, not a commodity provider, but actually a trusted partner. So you have them step out of the goal mouth, and it's you, even your competition, your partners, and the customer kicking into an open goal against their problem. So that's a very long-winded response to your very
Now you can see as to why I've been so excited to be able to get you on the show. Marcus, I'm going to kick off really with regards to it's my gravest and most frustrating thing that I've ever found with regards to sales is people's perception of where sales ends and marketing begins, or when marketing sales and marketing finishes and sales begins. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a firm believer that this is a hand and glove situation and they both work collectively with each other. But is it fair to say that they are brother and sister or twins of the same parents, as opposed to this identical thing where people get misconstrued with what's one and what's the other?
No, sales is a subset of marketing. Everything that touches the customer is marketing. And I think marketing should be a component of customer success. If we start with the customer at the heart of everything that we do, everything that we say, everything that we think, and we think as the customer, not about the customer, then we are in a good place. I think part of the problem is that sales and marketing, more often than not, have an adversarial relationship, and there's destructive conflict. And that's down to egos and stupidity. The reality is that if you put the customer at the heart of everything you do, and your partners around that, and then your operations around that in order to serve the partners and the customers, then you don't go far wrong. I would definitely recommend listening to Colin Shaw's podcast. He's just beyond philosophy, his company is. Look him up. Mark Schaefer on Marketing Rebellion. Matthew Sweezy, the Context Marketing Revolution. These 3 guys have really got clarity because they put the customer at the heart of everything. It's about humanization. And one thing that really pisses me off, marketing automation and sales enablement technologies used badly. They're brilliant, they're well thought through, but if you use them badly, all they do is amplify your stupidity. and dehumanize the whole process. So I had somebody approach me for a job with one of my clients, and he proudly told me that he could speak to 3,000 decision makers a month using marketing automation. And with a 1% conversion rate, that would be 30 deals. But what I'm concerned about is the 99% who will never do business with us.
And got a really bad reputation for having, treated them with such disdain in the interim.
Well, the price of free marketing is all the people who will never do business with you. And so spamming people, automation, all of that kind of stuff used poorly is worse than doing nothing. I would rather be anonymous than on a blacklist.
Amen. Amen. I'm going to be rather challenging then, because I remember when we first started doing business together, when I first became a student of yours, and we've just talked about customer centric and putting the customer first. So my first question really to you today is, so why does it feel like the buyer is always in control, and how do we almost equal the balance?
Well, the reason the buyer's in control largely is because most salespeople are crap. Their managers are worse, and their leaders are idiots. Without putting too fine a point on it, they're fixated on selfish selling, which means that they want to talk about their ugly children. They can't wait to fire up PowerPoint and inflict that torture on people. I mean, if your sales deck has a picture of your headquarters, go and throw yourself off a cliff. Do everybody a favor. If you spend time talking about you, your company, your products, your services before you've actually understood what the customer needs, what they want, what they're trying to achieve, what their vision is, then you have no business being in sales. And so what you do is you turn up, you show up and throw up, you quote and hope, and you sell and run. Well, I say you take an order and run. And what you're doing when you approach it like that is you're sounding like everybody else. The reality is that 60% of buying cycles result in the status quo. Nothing changes, mostly because you're crap at what you do, okay? Of the 40% remaining, 10.4% end up in a bid situation, of which you have a 1 in 4 chance of winning, which means that you have a 1 in 38.5 cycles chance of winning through bids. Okay, so bids and tenders, not a good business model unless you've got massive deep pockets and the ability to fund those wasted costs of pursuit. Of the remaining 29.6%, those go to the vendor that destabilize the current preference in the prospect's mind, that can demonstrate clearly the cost of staying stuck is higher than the cost of change, and that turns that into an investment, is able to create enough difference, white space between the incumbent or the current status quo, the competition and everything else, and you. If you can't do that, it will probably end up in the status quo. And you need to be able to eliminate anticipated regret and blame. Now, anticipated regret and blame is like future-based buyer's remorse. So you need to be able to tell great customer hero stories. You need to be able to think as the customer. But again, let me ask you this, Jay. How often have you ever come across marketing speaking to customers?
Sadly, not as frequently as I would have liked.
I mean, can you honestly think of more than half a dozen cases?
Not off the top of my head, without having to really scratch it.
Right. Okay. Well, given that everything that touches the customer is marketing, why the hell isn't marketing involved in speaking to customers? My view is that most chief marketing officers are redundant. They just don't know they are, because they spend all this money on, without putting too fine a point on it, onanistic. If you know who Onan was, look him up in the Bible. Okay, and onanistic marketing activity, which is allows them to measure stuff that doesn't matter. Who cares how many opens and click-throughs you get? What actually matters is, did somebody buy? Do you care if somebody gives you an award? No. But loads of CMOs love a good award. Do you care how many dials somebody makes? Sales is not a numbers game unless you're doing it poorly. Sales is an intellectual activity. It's a cerebral activity. It requires thought. Marketing requires thought. If you understand the customer's journey, how they got to the point where they may choose to buy something in your sphere, and you understand what it takes for them to move from the status quo to make a decision, and what all the moving parts are, because it's not just a problem in finance or in operations. All of these things, a business is an organic machine with all these different moving parts. And if you as a seller don't have that ability to step back, my friend Sam Sethi, when he was in Sandhurst, his commanding officer said, "Sam, stand with your nose to the map. You're a private now. Take one step back. You're a corporal. One more, you're a sergeant. One more, you're a lieutenant. One more, you're a captain. One more, major, colonel, all the way back to the other side of the room." And now he was a general. And if you don't think like a general, then you will basically be cannon fodder. And that's how procurement really plays bad salespeople. But we'll talk about this when I pause for breath.
I love the analogy. As you know, I'm also a veteran of the service, so it's a great analogy and something I can really, really relate to. Marcus, I guess my big concern then is for people listening to this and suddenly, that big gasp of air I can almost hear people have going, "Oh my God, he's actually talking to me," is that this is something that either I do personally or I've certainly witnessed countless times. I'm almost set KPIs within my business to be able to do the dials and the likes. How do we get out of that rut once we've got into it? How do we get back to that place of safety where in actual fact we're either at least equal pegging with the person that we're pitching to, or perhaps even got the upper hand?
This is really simple but very tough. And the first thing is, you need to see yourself as having the same level of authority as rights to your prospective customer. You need to see your time as valuable, your knowledge and insight as valuable. But instead, what most people do is they put their prospect onto the podium, onto a pedestal, and say, "Well, yes, sir, no, sir." And they do the forelock tugging, and it's all terribly subservient. You're not a vassal. They're the Egypt with the problem. They're the ones who've dug themselves into the hole and hit bedrock, and they can't keep digging because there's nowhere else to go without dynamite. And if you do your job well, you will position yourself as their equal. You need to be able to systematically take them through a process of self-discovery where they see you as somebody who can offer a sophisticated solution to a complex problem simply. And you gave my motto, which I think translates to double the money for half the work. And it also, that's the unofficial motto. The official motto is do less but better on purpose. So look at what you do and see what worked and what didn't work. Document it. Go in prepared. For every minute that you're in front of the customer, I believe you need 3 minutes of rehearsal, on top of which you have planning time and debriefing time. And very few sales organizations, let alone managers or individual salespeople, will give that commitment because they say, "I'm too busy." The reason you're too busy is you're wasting 7 out of 8 first meetings. That's the average. I mean, can you get that? 7 out of 8, 88% of all first meetings. You may as well have just taken the money, poured petrol on it, and burnt it.
Yeah, I must admit, I often use the analogy: if your perception of being able to either market or sell well is to be able to take a chunk of cash, usually something out of a budget maybe, and just thrown it at the wall with some form of half-cocked social media ad or a LinkedIn page or a PPC campaign with the hope that it's going to reach enough people, then you might as well take the entire budget outside and pass it to the nearest stranger with the hope that they hold pity on you and come and spend a few pounds of it in your shop.
Well, in reality, that's exactly what most people are doing. Last year, $268 billion was spent.
Sorry, say that figure again.
$268 billion was spent on pay-per-click advertising on Facebook and Google that got only one click. That's 1.77 trillion impressions. Okay, now wait for this. 1.44 quadrillion impressions were delivered that got 0 clicks on pay-per-click. Okay, so for most of you, it is utterly wasted money and effort, and it's not a good bet. The majority of, and let me ask you this, Jay, how many corporate marketing feeds have you subscribed to willingly?
Do you know, I can't even think of one I have that I've done willingly, unless I've been duped into it from some form of webinar.
Right, okay. So if you're listening to this, my next question is, of the ones you have subscribed to willingly, how many of those end up in the, well, looks interesting, must get back to that later?
I would imagine the majority.
Or you look forward to receiving their communication. Okay, so email marketing, by and large, wasted as well. Very powerful, used correctly, but mostly it's just noise. And you remember a moment ago I said, unless you can stand apart and differentiate and create white space between you and everyone else, you sound like everyone else, so they stick with the status quo. So all of that's wasted as well. And the abuse that goes on LinkedIn of the platform, it's awful. I mean, get your profile sorted out. Do not make it a CV. If it's on there, make sure there's a proper photograph, a decent banner. Make sure that your work experience talks about how you've helped customers, just like your ideal customer. And engage in value delivery of content that makes people sit up, prick up their ears and think. Every time they hear from you, they should welcome that interaction. If they see your number come up on caller ID and they're speaking to their gynecologist, they'll stop the appointment and say, you know, just stay where you are for a second. I need to take this call. Okay. But you need to be valuable and you need to improve their experience at every step. But the problem is almost no one does. It's just noise, 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 noise. And you're an interruption.
I guess the only risk there then, Marcus, for someone that's entering this and moving away from, listening to having heard what you've said and realise that they don't want to spell a quadrillion pound on 0 impressions and wants to be able to move into that content delivery of just good experience. I guess the only risk is that people go almost the opposite direction and start giving away the whole family jewels on the first experience to everyone in the hope that someone might subsequently see it of value. How do you stop people moving to the other end of the pendulum?
There is a 4-letter acronym which you're familiar with, STFU. Okay, I have never listened my way out of a sale. I've talked my way out of many. So the first thing is you need to learn how to listen. And Dr. Laura Janicek describes listening as the transfer of meaning. So again, get the other person's meaning. Really listen and pay attention. Attention is a currency. You build up an emotional bank account through listening, and listening with empathy. You've got to avoid falling into bias sympathy. Bias sympathy is where you fall into the trap of saying, well, if someone hit me with that price tag, I'd probably think it's expensive or I'd want a discount. So the first thing you need to do is you need to turn up to understand. And the analogy here is a good butler. A good butler has dignity and poise, but they are there to serve. And there is nothing wrong with service. Yeah, ask any military veteran. Yeah, service is about doing good for others. It's about serving others. It does not mean servitude. So again, that equal stature is really important psychologically. And understanding what the boundaries are. Bullies bully because no one puts their fingers behind their trachea until they go blue and say, this is the limit. Okay. And so you need to learn where the boundaries are and be ready to enforce them. You need to agree up front what you want to have happen, what you don't want to have happen, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, what your intended outcomes are mutually, so that you're working in partnership, and that this is the upfront partnership agreement between me as a seller and you as a buyer. I want to know before we start what we are trying to achieve. Are we working towards a common intended outcome, or are we at odds with one another? If we're at odds with one another, then I need to establish, is there a bridge that I can build with you? If there isn't a bridge, then I need to be able to walk away at that point. I think we need to make sure that we have consent. Selling is not something you do to someone. It's something you do with someone. And unless you've done your research, you're going to turn up and you're going to default to what you know and what's familiar, which is bleh, and you vomit up stuff about your background, your history, your company, your products, your services, who you've helped, all that kind of stuff. No good. Okay. So you need to agree all of that stuff up front. Define a clear agenda. Make sure that it's a safe place so that both sides can walk away if it's not, without any ill feeling or any sense of having been used and abused. Make sure that they feel safe when you're going to ask them questions. I ask difficult, uncomfortable, challenging questions, but I can't ask those unless I have their consent up front. If I have their consent, then I can ask them whatever I like, because then I can remind them and say, Jay, you remember earlier on I said I was going to ask you a shitty question. Now's one of them. Okay, buckle up. Okay, and if you don't want to answer it, feel free not to, but it may mean that I can't take this any further. Now I can ask them a great question. So one of my favorite questions when I'm dealing with founders and CEOs and they're complaining about their salespeople is, so do you mind if I ask this? Did you hire them that way, or did you make them that way? Because at the end of the day, they were the ones responsible. Okay, when did you realize that your manager is the problem? Now, most people in my line of work won't do that. What they'll do is they'll say, oh, well, we need to build a script. We need to automate the marketing. But unless you find the problem at its root cause, you can't ever fix it so it goes away forever. And that's why people come to us. Now, one final point on this. If you look at the different gradations of salespeople, if you think of a staircase, at the bottom, you have the commodity product provider who basically is trying to sell a magic pill. Okay. But no one really wants to pay a lot of money for a pill. So you inevitably end up in a conversation about price. The next level up is the authority. And this is where you see all these tedious gurus, which is why I'm always a little bit worried when someone introduces me as a guru. We'll call it something else by the end. And everybody tries to make their point, saying this is the only way. And I spent the last 17 years with a company called Sandler, and their system is very good. But there are other great systems out there as well. And they all work to a degree if applied appropriately. But if they're not, then they're just a move, they're just technique. And this is where the technique becomes a sword, a weapon, instead of a shield to protect the customer, to protect you. And these authorities very quickly sound like everybody else. And so then they descend into product selling. Now, the next level up, this is where, and I see this as a double-edged sword, because you become the hero seller. And people come to you for your strength because they want to be defended. But you should never be the hero in your customer's story. The customer should be the hero. You need to be Yoda or Obi-Wan. You need to be Sherpa Tenzing. What you're not is Luke Skywalker or Edmund Hillary. You are the guide that takes them through that customer hero journey story. Now, the hero journey framework is you have a protagonist who meets a problem and they're facing near peril. And they're at their lower ebb, and along comes the guide. That's you, that's me. And the guide helps them go through multiple perils of ups and downs, and near peril again, or near death. And at the end, they eventually win out. But the customer's the hero. Now, how many of your audience do you reckon have gone back to their customers and taken down their true story? How they got into the industry, what they love about it, what they're trying to achieve, what challenges they face, the experience they've gone through in dealing with those challenges, why they selected you as a provider, what results you've been able to get, what the alternatives were, yeah? And almost no one does that. If you've ever suffered the frustration of receiving a case study, it's always about people beating their chest about how brilliant they were. So the next level up is the wise sage, the guide. And they're very different from the hero seller. The hero seller does quite a lot of chest beating. They're very strong in their field. But the Obi-Wans of this world are great coaches. People come to them because they deliver wisdom, and they want to be wiser by having been sold to by them, by being having their thinking evolve through the questions that these salespeople ask. And herein lies the difference. Your average seller asks questions to gather information, and those are the product sellers and most of the authority sellers. The slightly better ones, and I still class them as not very good, will ask questions to gain understanding. Now, there's obviously a sliding scale, but the best salespeople ask questions that deliver insight. A blinding flash of the painfully obvious. Routinely when I'm selling, I have people say things like, I've been doing this 35 years, and I can't believe I've never thought of it that way before. Or, oh, I need a minute to think about that. Wow, that's a good question. Now, there is not one of you out there that is going to come across an original objection or an original problem. So all of this can be rehearsed and planned for. But most of you are too busy doing busy work instead of doing the right kind of work, which is thinking, research, planning, rehearsal, then execution. That's the silly bit, yeah? And then the debrief in writing and then verbally. I love it when we have red team, white team meetings, which is like a pre-mortem. So the white team is made up, typically in a team, of the person who's priming the sale, leading it, and one other salesperson from the team. And it's their job to defend the opportunity. Everybody else is to tear it apart. Not to destroy it, but to find the gaps. Now, we did this recently with an MSP client of mine, and they won a £300,000 deal that was completely off the boil and was likely to die on its ass because of the red team meeting. Because the red team identified the gaps, and then they went back and filled those gaps with answers from the prospect. And they ended up getting a £300,000 deal. Now, bear in mind, their average order value is about £3,000.
It just shows the real power of what can be done by not rushing it and thinking about yourself and key performance indicators and sales targets, but in actual fact, breaking it back down and saying, who do I want to work with? Why do I want to work with them? What solution can I be of value to them? And how do I best bridge that gap to introduce them to the opportunity and then make everyone an individual? So in actual fact, it's a win-win-win, as opposed to going in there with this preconsidered presumption of, because I've got something that you need, I'm therefore the upper hand and you've got to buy from me.
Well, there is that old cliche, which is if you assume it makes an ass out of you and me. And it genuinely does. You touched on something else that's really important. Identify who your ideal customer is, your ICP, ideal customer profile. And you don't have to look at the total addressable market. Okay, you need to look at the total realizable market, and you need to look at just those people who fit your profile. Don't go after, and this is why so many salespeople are out of control when it comes to their pipeline, because they're prospecting for people who are 37 or 72 or 82% fit instead of 100% fit. If you spent your time just focusing on those people who you can help best and really delivering your message, your questions, your solutions to solve their problems, then you wouldn't face the same level of resistance and you wouldn't need to deal with objections in the same way.
Absolutely. I mean, if you can reduce it down from having bought a list of everyone in the industry that might ever possibly buy something from somewhere, and then starts to aggregate your way through the list at 100 dials a day and the likes, and you simply turn around and said, do you know what, we've got 4 opportunities this month to be able to work with new clients, and we're going to be able to spend a week on each of those, being able to understand more about who they are and why they are and where we need to be in order to be of best service to them. And then on the Friday afternoon, Friday lunchtime maybe, that we made the first approach after having spent 4.5 days in works towards being able to establish why, the chances are you're going to have a far better reaction than you are if you simply send one of those free emails that you keep talking about.
And go to the pub before you make that call and knock down a couple of pints of Stella.
Other drinks such as Guinness are available.
Absolutely. Well, I'm a firm believer that there's nothing like loosening your tongue and just being able to sell freely, but it's the preparation and being in that good space. Work on yourself. Most of the work that I do with my clients is actually around helping them be comfortable in their own skin, recognizing that they have the right to be there, they have the right to play. But most salespeople suffer from a negative preconception about being a salesperson. So they go for shitty titles like business development manager or consultant. Just be proud to be in sales. It is the oldest profession and nothing happens unless someone sells something. Everything in business requires money to transfer from someone else to you. And what you keep matters more than what you make. So stop focusing on revenue and focus on profit. Focus on cash flow, making sure that you're collecting the money. And get comfortable being a salesperson. It's not a grubby thing when it's done well. When it's done badly, it is absolutely grubby. What I'm really grateful for with COVID is the fact that it is creating a bloodbath in our industry and our profession. And lots of people will be forced out who shouldn't be in it. But I lay the problem firmly at leadership's feet. Because leaders are fixated on the wrong end of the problem. Leaders are fixated on hitting a revenue target, on growth targets. What they should be really fixated on is creating lifetime customers. They should be fixated on creating an environment where your staff are highly engaged, want to come to work and give massive discretionary effort. But you don't see that in most sales organizations. What you see is the battlefield littered with corpses of people who've been burnt out. I know that mental health is a subject close to your heart. I look at the sales profession, and I use that term as loosely as possible, and it's littered with people who are stressed to the gills. They are under pressure to do stupid things. And I know places where they do 300 dials a day. I would rather they made maybe 25 dial attempts, got through to 6, because they'd done a really good job of the research and they teed stuff up. They'd warm them up. And again, when I'm working with my clients as a CRO, what we're doing is we're recruiting people who will prospect for 5 years down the road. Because we're not owned by private equity or venture capital, we're not publicly listed businesses. We have that luxury. It gives us a massive competitive advantage because we can take our time. We can measure and reward people on the basis of their behavior instead of simply on their activity levels, because activity does not mean meaningful action. It doesn't mean stuff that advances the sale. What often happens is people focus on continuation, which means that they end up with this pipeline that looks like a pair of old granny knickers because they're just spinning their wheels, and it's baggy at the top, it's baggy and bulgy in the middle, and it's saggy at the bottom. What it should look like is a thong. It needs to look wide at the top and decreasingly narrow until it gets to the bottom. And stop trying to get people to say yes to you. Try and spend your time disqualifying people quickly so that you can invest your time, which is scarce, your money, which is scarce, your resources, which are scarce, on those opportunities you can and will win, not those that you could but won't or shouldn't. And so then you don't have, I mean, if you eliminate, there's a process where effectively the buyer is in control. Okay, and what they do is they deceive salespeople into thinking they have some interest. Then they have them spill their guts and give stuff away, give insight away. Then they hit them with a bunch of objections, stalls, smoke screens, obfuscations, and everything else. And the salesperson is trained to handle objections. Again, another total waste of time. You should get ahead of the objection. You're not going to come across any original ones. I've been selling 35 years, and I've only ever come across one that was remotely original, and it was a lie, which is that a Sikh told a socially inept salesperson that he didn't believe in barter because it was against his religion. And can you imagine an Indian businessman not bartering? Yeah, but this guy was so culturally unaware that he thought that was real. And the problem is that so many people get ghosted. Well, the reason you get ghosted is because you haven't agreed at the beginning that at the end you will map out some clear next steps. Yeah. And 7 out of 8 first meetings, you've spent all that money getting the lead, buying the lead, putting it into the top of your marketing funnel, spamming them with emails, trying to get them through your content, and then making bad telephone approaches. And you finally get someone suckered into a meeting, and then you blow 7 out of 8 of them. Why? Because you haven't done your prep, you haven't agreed up front that what will happen at the end, and you haven't agreed that next step before you leave. So you spend most of your time chasing. In my experience, probably, I don't know, 7 out of 8 hours a day of the average salesperson is spent chasing people they should have disqualified or closed on the last call.
Right at the very beginning, or like you say, closed.
Well, if you fix that, that's a 400% increase in production capability.
There and then, straight away. Yes, absolutely.
You don't need
Marcus, I never ever envisaged that we were going to have this conversations talking about granny's knickers and thongs. I can't tell you as to how grateful I've been for your insights today. And I'm sure that there will be many questions that people would want to be able to still raise and ask. How best would people want to be able to get in touch with you, having listened to this episode and thought, do you know what, I really need to be able to learn a little more from the man that isn't a guru, but apparently is now a sage of sales within the industry. How would people get in touch with you, my friend?
You can get me at marcus@laughs-last.com. So he who laughs last longest. So marcus@laughs-last.com or via LinkedIn. And I'm on Twitter as _Inquisitor, because I ask shitty, horrible questions. And I've got 2 podcasts, which you can look up. Just put in Marcus Cauchi or Scale Ups and Hypergrowth Podcast. And got 200 episodes on there now, 4,000 years of experience distilled into those podcasts. And one final tip.
Please.
The best question you can ask is not what, when, why, or how. It's who. Always, if you've got a problem, ask yourself who knows how to do this and go and ask them.
Which is what we've done today, which is why I'm so grateful for your time and your contribution, my friend. Thank you so much. I'm sure people will have been listening to this with a pad scribbled with many, many notes. That's Jay Allen from the ADDAZERO Business Podcast, and we'll be back again in a fortnight's time with another exciting episodes to be able to help you and your business to be able to add a zero to your personal disposable income.